Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Warships with Rear Admiral Jingles. And wait, no, stop, don't do anything hasty. I know this looks like an aircraft carrier replay. Yeah, okay, it is an aircraft carrier replay, but it's not what you think. And I can't really explain it without massive spoilers. Although you're not going to have to wait for very long at all to see why it is I'm making you watch an aircraft carrier replay. Trust me, trust your Uncle Jingles, it's going to be worth it. Some of you have probably already figured it out. Because the hero, or depending on your perspective, the villain of today's battle, who goes by the name of, I'm not making this up, definitely not a CV main. We're just going to call him CV main because he's not fooling anybody. The carrier that he's playing is the German Tier 8 Premium, the Graf Zeppelin, and he's also divisioned up with a pair of destroyers. And once that little tidbit of information sunk in, I'm fairly sure that those of you who hadn't already figured out what it is you're about to witness have probably got a fairly good idea of what's going on now. The Graf Zeppelin, by the way, was not well received when it was first introduced into the game, all the way back in 2017, well before the aircraft carrier rework, because this was the original bait and switch ship. The ship that was given to the community contributors, back when the community contributor program actually meant something, in order for them to publish reviews on it and prepare their audiences for what kind of ship it was they were going to be expected to spend money on, was not the same ship that went on sale. The initial backlash, of course, was against the community contributors who'd said, this is the ship you're going to be buying, when in fact it wasn't, but it wasn't their fault. Wargaming had switched ships on them without saying anything. I don't know whether or not Wargaming actually thought nobody was going to notice that the ship that was being sold to people wasn't the same one that had been advertised or reviewed. I don't actually think there was anything genuinely malicious going on. I don't think they were deliberately trying to be deceptive. It's just that they were trying to get the ship out in time for Gamescom 2017. And for one reason or another, they weren't happy with the ship that had been sent out for review. So literally days before it went on sale, they changed it. Way too late for anybody to do anything about it. Certainly nowhere near enough time for anybody to actually be able to play the ship that was going on sale and correct the reviews that they'd already published, which left all the community contributors looking like dicks. And also, by the way, it should probably go without saying, nowhere near enough time for Wargaming themselves to actually test the changes that they'd implemented 1 or 2 days before putting the ship on sale. Suffice to say, the Graf Zeppelin, when it was originally released back in 2017, was on sale for the grand total of 5 days before getting pulled from the shop. Wargaming, of course, rather than admitting to any actual wrongdoing, just pulled the usual excuse out of the bag and put it all down to miscommunication. The Graf Zeppelin would not return to World of Warships until after the aircraft carrier rework, years later. And we all know how successful that was. So, I think we can conclude that any resemblance to the ship that was first sent out to community contributors to review, or the ship that was actually put on sale, is long gone. What we have now, and there's his first kill, and if you hadn't already guessed exactly what's going to be going on in this battle, well, there it is. His first kill, not from his aircraft, but from his secondaries, while smoked up by the 2 destroyers that he's divisioned up with. I have actually featured something along these lines before. It was quite a while ago, I can't remember exactly when or what the video was, but this is not the first time we've seen aircraft carrier players on this channel indulging in these kind of underhanded, downright unethical shenanigans. Because here's the thing. There's a thing in World of Warships that's known as the smoke firing penalty. So for those of you who are unfamiliar of what it is, or for those of you who are unfamiliar with how it works, just being inside a smoke screen does not... Oh, and there's a second kill. Again with the secondaries. Just being inside a smoke screen does not make you undetectable if you're firing your guns. There's a smoke firing penalty. The bigger the guns, the bigger the smoke firing penalty. So while a destroyer, for example, could hide inside a smoke screen firing its guns and not be actually spotted until somebody gets to within, say, 4 kilometers, a light cruiser would probably get spotted if somebody approached to within 6 kilometers, a heavy cruiser with its 8-inch guns I mean, it varies precisely from ship to ship, but you're probably looking at something like 8 to maybe 10 kilometers. A battleship, forget it. There's absolutely no point. Oh, and he's actually managed to sink something with his aircraft. Well, that's nice. There's almost no point if you're in something that has battleship caliber guns from trying to stay hidden in a smoke screen while firing the guns at the same time. People are going to see you anyway. And the thing about the Graf Zeppelin is it has a lot of secondaries. Some of them are 105mm, some are 150mm, light cruiser caliber guns. But the Graf Zeppelin will not get spotted if it's inside a smokescreen, assuming nobody's hydroing or radaring it, until somebody closes to the minimum assured detection range of 2 kilometers, despite the fact that a light cruiser firing 150mm guns inside a smokescreen would probably be detected at a range of 6. How can that possibly work? Well, it's only main battery guns that are affected by the smoke firing penalty. The Graf Zeppelin doesn't have any main battery guns. They're all secondaries, and secondaries don't count. So the Graf Zeppelin can, and in fact is, sailing around with its 12 105mm secondaries, and wait for it, 16 16 150mm secondaries, quite happily blazing away without any fear of detection, unless somebody gets close enough to hydro or radar him, or in fact just sail right into him and get within his 2 kilometer assured minimum detection range, but quite happily blazing away at anybody who gets within range of these secondaries. And these are German secondaries. So they're accurate, they're rapid firing, they're long ranged. They're probably longer range than anybody has any right to expect, because I'm pretty sure that not a CV main has spec'd for secondaries as best you can in a carrier, and is happily sailing around battering 7 different shades of shit out of anybody who's unfortunate enough to get to within range of these secondaries. Oh, yep, definitely a secondary build. He's got the German legendary commander on board. Now the secondaries are fired even faster, which is very bad news for the Benson. There goes another kill. Again, with the secondaries. The Atago, of course, is getting way too close. But here's the thing. He's got a destroyer escort. Also, the Graf Zeppelin's torpedo bombers are absolutely lethal. So the Atago's managed to detect him, but in order to get close enough to detect him, you're going to get torpedoed by the destroyer escort if you don't get hammered by the secondaries. So the Atago's down. Not his kill, of course. That was down to the escorting destroyers. He's still one short of a Kraken, but don't worry, there's still plenty of enemy ships. Oh, I don't know if you just noticed, there were some shells that you just saw there shattering harmlessly on his flight deck. Those were from the French Tier 8 heavy cruiser, the Algerie. 8-inch armor-piercing shells shattering on his flight deck. That's not all, of course, because the Graf Zeppelin is basically a battleship hull, although it doesn't have battleship armor, but it does have reinforced belt plating and the, functionally immune flight deck there as well, which is great news if you're in a destroyer. I mean, aside from having to run the gauntlet of all the secondaries on one of these things, if you do actually see it, it's basically immune to your high explosive shells. You have to use armor piercing. And most of those are going to shatter too. So good luck with that. Oh, and these aircraft, by the way, the TA-152, they did actually exist. They were designed by Kurt Tank, who also designed the Focke-Wulf 190. He was one of the very few German World War II aircraft designers who was given the honour of having the aircraft named after him personally, rather than the factory that manufactured them. Hence TA-152 from his surname, Tank. They were high altitude interceptors. Not low-level torpedo bombers. I mean, it's not out of the question. Obviously, they were never used in the torpedo bomber role. It's not that Germany didn't have torpedo bombers. They kind of did, while at the same time also they kind of didn't. Typically, the medium bombers, the Heinkel HE-111, was used in the torpedo bomber role for convoy attacks. And they do have the Heinkel modelled in-game, but I think it'd be a bit of a stretch expecting it to be launched from a flight deck this short. So, fair enough. Instead, we've got what was unarguably Germany's best high-level interceptor being used as a torpedo bomber. Fine, whatever. I don't think that's what makes this thing overpowered under these circumstances. Because let's not forget, the other thing about these secondaries, which I haven't mentioned yet, because they're German, they get the quarter caliber penetration rule. This rule applies to German cruisers with 150mm guns or bigger, German destroyers. Oh look, there's a submarine trying to catch him. Oh dear. Oh, this is hilarious. So not only has he racked up a bunch of secondary hits on the submarine, forcing it to dive, and now of course the submarine can't see him, he also cannot see the submarine, but that doesn't matter because he's in an aircraft carrier. And aircraft carriers get automatic anti-submarine warfare. So without him having to do anything, anybody else would have to actually launch their ASW aircraft and then attempt to guess where the undetected submarine was. But because he's in an aircraft carrier, he doesn't have to put up with any of that shit. It's all taken care of for him. He's launching torpedo attacks on this poor hood while battering it with his secondaries, while it's getting lit up by his 2 destroyer escorts, and without actually doing anything himself, he's also continuing to score. In fact, he's just got the high caliber award, and his automatic doesn't have to do anything to initiate it himself, doesn't even need to be aware that there's a submarine within range. His automatic ASW planes are continuing to score depth charge hits on the submarine that was dumb enough to try to attack an aircraft carrier. I feel really conflicted here because I don't want to be in the position of having to express sympathy for a submarine. I mean, he doesn't even know where the submarine is, right? Yeah? But that poor submarine, yeah, he's dead. Didn't know where the submarine was, wasn't purposefully attacking it, was focusing all of his attention on the warships ahead of him, sank an undetected submarine anyway, and to all intents and purposes, he may as well not have even known that the submarine was there because he didn't do anything about it. That was all automatic. How the hell can that be fair? This is all, of course, because Wargaming have pretty much automated almost everything to do with aircraft carriers other than launching, recycling, and recovering aircraft. Oh, I was talking about the quarter caliber penetration rule, wasn't I? Yeah, because it's a German aircraft carrier. I should probably cover that before I forget and get sidetracked again. Although I'm pretty sure he's about to sink the hood. His secondaries are still going. There's a fire. There's the hood. Oh my God. Right. So, yes, German guns get what's known as the quarter caliber penetration rule for their high explosive shells. So this applies to German cruisers with 150mm guns or higher, which means that they basically get 37mm of penetration on their high explosive shells without even having to take the IFHE skill. Oh, and that's just the light cruisers with 37mm of high explosive penetration. The heavy cruisers with 203mm guns get more than 50mm of high explosive penetration. The rule also applies to German destroyers with 128mm guns or higher. And it also applies to all German secondaries regardless of the caliber. So the 16 150mm guns that he's currently battering, that extremely unfortunate, he's going to kill him, isn't he? Yeah, there it is. Those automatic secondaries have 37mm of penetration. The 12 105mm guns and guns with that lower caliber in World of Warships are typically incapable of penetrating anything with high explosive shells and are usually only good for setting fires. But because it's a German 105mm secondary, it actually gets 26mm of penetration, which means they can shred destroyers and in some cases light cruisers too. Oh, and speaking of destroyers, I don't rate that. The Akazuki's dead too. Yet another secondary kill. How many kills is that now? How many? That's his 8th kill. And he's only gotten 2 of them with his aircraft. 5 with secondaries and 1 with automatic anti-submarine warfare defences. Oh, and if you think the enemy carrier is going to kill him, think again. Because the only things in this game that actually have effective anti-aircraft guns are the aircraft carriers. And he's got an armoured flight deck. So, yeah, good luck with that. Definitely not a CV main, is on 8 kills now. his entire team between them, well, I say he's on 8 kills. I think we have to give some credit to the 2 escorting destroyers that he's divisioned up with. So these 3 guys, because that's only fair, have killed 8 of the enemy team. No, actually, no, 9 of the enemy team, because one of the destroyers also has a kill. The entire remainder of their team between them have only managed to sink 1 ship, and there are only 2 enemies left. But those 2 enemies are in possession of 2 of the cap circles. So, there we go. Enemy submarine on half health. And I think, fortunately for the submarine, out of the range of the Graf Zeppelin's automatic anti-submarine warfare strike planes. That submarine has been doing the smart thing, by the way. He's basically been following these 3 guys around, recapturing all of the caps that they've been flipping. The problem for the submarine, actually has a number of problems, is that since he's spotted, he now has to submerge to go undetected. And he can't stay undetected and submerge forever. At some point, he's going to have to come up for air. And there's a carrier on the enemy team. He's dropped patrol fighters and is circling overhead. And is going to see him when he does that, because it was fairly obvious what the enemy submarine was doing. All you had to do was look at the minimap and see the cap circle behind you getting flipped. You know, you didn't have to be Lord Admiral Horatio Nelson to figure out what the submarine was doing, and it's relatively easy to counter if you're in an aircraft carrier. Speaking of which, they've spotted the enemy Lexington. Hang on a minute. Why is he backing up out of the smoke screen towards the enemy submarine? Because he has nothing to fear from the enemy submarine. He's in an aircraft carrier. And he wants to make sure that that enemy submarine is going to be in range of his automatic ASW defences. Meanwhile, the enemy carrier, basically a full health Lexington. Now, the Lexington's AA defences are just as potent as the Graf Zeppelin's, but the Graf Zeppelin has something that the Lexington doesn't. Really, really fast torpedo bombers who can survive the barrage of AA fire long enough to actually get their torpedoes off and strike hits. And, oh, well, yeah, that's what happens when you're in a submarine and you try to attack an aircraft carrier. The friendly submarine's gone down. Meanwhile, these aircraft are basically BF-109s, and this is what happens when you try to attack an aircraft carrier with aircraft. They're usually just not fast enough to get to the target and get their strike off without being shot down. Only when you're attacking a carrier, of course. Aircraft of any speed can always get at least 1 strike off against anything else, just not carriers. And yes, he was scoring depth charge hits against the submarine that he can't see. In fact, he's just sunk the submarine that he can't see and probably didn't even realise he was attacking. The TA-152s, however, because they are so incredibly fast, second only to the jets that have been introduced into the game, they can get to the target quickly enough in order to get the strike off without all of them being shot down. Those were the dive bombers, now the torpedo planes. Although the Lexington is making it difficult for him, he doesn't have a clear approach, but then again, the Lexington is inside secondary gun battery range, so he doesn't really need to hit him with the torpedo attack planes. He just pretty much needs to keep them spotted, wait for the secondaries to do the job, and there's kill number 10. 10 kills for definitely knock a CV main in the German Tier 8 carrier, the Graf Zeppelin. The division as a whole, of course, because he definitely wouldn't have been able to do this one alone, responsible for 11 of the 12 ships on the enemy team, with only the friendly Kipper getting a kill. It's worth pointing out, by the way, that of these 10 kills, he was only really directly involved in getting 3 of them. I mean, 2 automatic aircraft carrier anti-submarine warfare kills and 6 secondary kills. And this is where I get kind of conflicted, because, I mean, I'm sure you lot are going to have lots to say about this particular battle in the comments, but while on the one hand, I thought that was absolutely hilarious and utterly glorious to watch, and at the same time, the most disgusting thing I have ever seen in World of Warships. Was it because it was a carrier? I mean, I don't know. You could do the same thing in a grosser curve first. Just get yourself a division of rolling smokescreen destroyer escorts and roll around blasting everything with your secondaries. You couldn't do exactly the same thing. You might have to actually, target your own submarine kills, and you certainly wouldn't have the spotting advantage from the aircraft. But the secondary kills, yep, you can absolutely do pretty much exactly the same thing in a high-tier German battleship. I think what makes this kind of stupid, and also the reason why it's funny, is because secondaries don't suffer a smoke firing penalty. And I have no idea why not. I mean, think about this realistically. The smoke firing penalty is tied to the caliber of the guns that are firing inside the smoke screen, but not if they're secondaries. So you've got something the size of the Graf Zeppelin, or the size of the Grosser Kurfürst, blasting away with 150mm guns, and while doing that, having lower visibility than a light cruiser or even a destroyer in the same smoke screen doing exactly the same thing but with their main battery guns. And it's funny, but it doesn't make the slightest bit of sense. Of course, that's also why it's funny. I mean, unless you're on the receiving end, of course. But it is what it is. That is the situation, bizarre though it may be. And as long as that remains the situation, we're going to continue to see people exploiting the mechanics by doing dumb but hilarious shit like this. I'm sure you all have plenty to say about that. You know what to do. The comments section is right there. I hope you've enjoyed and been amused by today's video. And as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.